In January 2018, Elon Musk, founder of the Boring Company, announced the release of 20,000 limited edition flamethrowers. To avoid shipping regulations, Musk limited the flame to under 10 feet and even labeled the product as not a flamethrower. The stunt, which fulfilled a promise tied to selling 50,000 Boring Company hats, made Musk, already fairly well liked, even more widely popular. Not universally liked, of course. The guy was still connected to some pretty awful things and was very clearly a nepo baby, but I bring this up to remind you that there was a time when Elon and other tech figures didn't struggle as much to win over the general public. With recent developments in Elon's character, mostly just exposing who he's always been, an extremely socially awkward guy who has trouble doing anything but building companies to hundreds of millions of dollars.
Legalize comedy!
It's made people completely forget about this earlier arc and revealed a universal truth about most billionaires. None of these people are actually as smart as we make them seem. So how did someone tied to some of the biggest scandals in modern history reach a state of idolization and praise? How have other tech giants and billionaires used similar tactics to shape public perception, leaving us confused, cynical, and distrustful? And how do we begin to humble some of the most powerful and influential people in the world? Let's try to answer those questions in this video. In order to understand the tech oligarchs' rise to power a little more thoroughly, we have to take a look at what was going on in the early to mid-2010s. I like to call this period of history the Technology Optimism Era. This era can be most accurately characterized by social media being fun, entrepreneurs humanizing themselves, and online businesses paving a hopeful outlook for the future of work. Back in those days, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter were all really quite simple, not heavily monetized, and didn't incentivize you to spend all day on their platforms. As a result, they felt genuinely cool to be on. I remember being in high school, posting a random picture to Instagram with one of their over-the-top moody filters and seeing a measly 4 likes roll in, feeling like I was the coolest dude in the world. Little did I know that Instagram post would lead to a crippling Reels addiction a decade later. I'm only half kidding. Through the increased activity of these platforms, something was clearly being signaled. Social media was the new hip place to be. I think this line from one of my favorite movies, The Social Network, delivered by Sean Parker, who was played by Justin Timberlake, captures it well.
We lived on farms and then we lived in cities and now we're going to live on the internet.
Because the social media platforms felt new and cool, the guys building these platforms felt cool by association. Some of these guys had started these companies from their bedrooms with a few friends, writing code while slamming cups of coffee, balancing the college party lifestyle with their entrepreneurial dreams. And even if they had some financial or genetic advantages that allowed them to achieve these goals easier, they still did a great job at portraying themselves as regular dudes. In his book Hatching Twitter, which explains the untold story of the creation of the platform, Nick Hilton outlines the peculiarity of Twitter founder Jack Dorsey. One day he showed up to work with a white t-shirt that had his cell phone number sewn onto the front in giant dark numerals. He explained to a coworker that it was an experiment. Going back to the movie The Social Network as another example, I know the villain of that story is Mark Zuckerberg himself, and that's quite obvious, but it's still hard to watch that movie as a young guy and not feel inspired by the chaos and allure of building an internet company out of your dorm room. Also, while Zuckerberg is clearly portrayed as a dick, he's a smart, witty dick, which makes him seem kinda cool. In fact, this movie is one of the biggest reasons that I decided to major in computer science in college, which I eventually switched from to cognitive science. And of course, there were Elon Musk's stories, sleeping in his offices, working 80 to 120-hour work weeks just to reach success. In an interview with Bloomberg, he's even quoted to have said, "The reason I sleep on the floor was not because I couldn't go across the road and be at the hotel. It was because I wanted my circumstance to be worse than everyone else at the company on purpose. Like whatever pain they felt, I wanted mine to be worse. That's why I did it, and it makes a huge difference to people." That shows a serious level of empathy and humanity to a guy who also appears to be a super genius. How could you not be a little awestruck by that? Hell, even the tech jobs where you'd be working for one of these companies instead of building them seemed cool. Remember seeing Google's offices back in the day? That shit felt like a dream. Eventually, all of these portrayals, combined with the rise of social media, created an entire generation of teenagers who grew up on the internet chasing the startup founder billionaire lifestyle. Well, I got an idea. How about we do exactly what these billionaires don't want us to do and start saving our money wisely using today's sponsor, Chime. Chime offers a smarter way to bank and manage your money. For years, I let my money rot away in a regular checking account with no interest. I was basically losing money due to inflation. But with Chime, I'm able to utilize their high-yield savings account with no monthly fees and no minimum balance requirement. All you have to do is set up direct deposit to your account, automate a percentage or dollar amount of every paycheck straight to your savings, and every day your money earns up to 3.75% APY, which is 9 times the national average savings rate. To put this into perspective, $7,000 in a regular savings account earns about $27 a year, but in Chime's HYSA, it could earn around $263 a year. It might not seem like a lot of money in the moment, but that money compounds, and even without you depositing any more into that account, it grows exponentially year by year. 82% of Americans don't have a high-yield savings account, which is an absolutely absurd statistic. So if that's you, this is probably your sign to stop losing out on free money. It's a good time to sign up for Chime right now because they're offering up to a $100 bonus, and you can also earn up to 3.75% APY on your savings. The link is at the top of the description, or you can just scan the QR code that you see on screen right now. Plus, you can access their full suite of products like no overdraft fees and your paycheck up to 2 days early. I talked about this billionaire guru course seller era of the internet in great detail in my Rise and Fall of Self-Help Gurus video, so I'll try to provide a more succinct version here. When social media and the internet democratized information previously reserved for people in places of power, it gave average Joes the ability to create businesses with little to no capital and use social media's free attention to promote whatever services they had to offer, even if they were not at all qualified to be providing those services. We had the dropshipping era, where people would buy a product on cheap websites like AliExpress and create their own website and Facebook advertisements that made the product seem way more valuable than it actually was. Then we had the guys trying to teach guys how to become a dropshipper, and their video courses on how to get rich were actually how they got rich. There was, and still is, plenty of people who give advice in subjects they have no business giving advice in, offering their services for thousands of dollars an hour. And as a result, an unprecedented amount of snake oil salesmen and grifters spawned, making the public extremely confused about who was actually a trustworthy authority figure in the age of the internet. That point will be more important later in the video. These were the first seeds planted that marked the downfall of the cool billionaire entrepreneur aesthetic. But it wasn't until 2018 when those seeds really began to sprout. On April 10th, 2018, Mark Zuckerberg was called in front of the United States Senate to testify about the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal. After an investigation by the Office of the Attorney General, it was found that Facebook implemented misleading privacy agreements, allowing third parties like the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica to obtain personal data from roughly 87 million Facebook users, including over half of district residents, and use that data to manipulate the 2016 election. What happened in that courtroom was some of the most bizarre behavior we've seen from a CEO of one of the richest and most influential companies in the world till this day. Zuck was terrified, like someone was secretly pointing a gun at him from the rafters if he said even just one word wrong. He would smile only to have it disappear moments later in a sociopathic manner, sparking entire video breakdowns of his body language. He would have strange answers to senators' questions.
Do you know who Palantir is?
I do.
Some people have referred to them as Stanford Analytica. Do you agree?
Senator, I have not heard that.
Okay, that was partly their fault. He even sipped his water like a lizard, leading to allegations of having reptilian origins. The clips went viral, ironically, on social media platforms. And this is where something in the public sentiment started to shift. The average person started to think something that people who were labeled fringe conspiracy theorists thought for years now. Maybe all these rich guys are actually just evil pieces of shit, and maybe to get to that level of wealth, you have to do some pretty evil, weird things. Thanks to the internet and the very platforms these tech oligarchs helped build, exposés of billionaires that were once brushed off, or at least not taken seriously enough by the general public to prompt any form of boycotting, started to surface. And they began to be exposed for who they really are. Pretty socially awkward, also just weirdly behaviored guys who are good at nothing but basically just one thing. In the case of Elon Musk, there's several things people point to. His father was involved in emerald mining in South Africa during the apartheid era, though the extent and details of that involvement are disputed, and Musk lived with him after his parents divorced. Musk himself has also faced public criticism over his relationship with his transgender daughter, Vivian Jenna Wilson, who has estranged herself from him and described him as narcissistic and uncaring, while he has attributed her views to what he calls the woke mind virus. Then there's his true jump off the deep end by being Trump's earpiece for a while, promoting right-wing ideology while at the same time trying to be this relatable, cool founder to absolutely no avail.
I am become meme. Yeah, pretty much.
Through his work with Trump and DOGE, otherwise known as the Department of Government Efficiency, loads of people lost their jobs, and he helped cut U.S. aid, which is responsible for providing foreign aid, calling it a criminal organization and beyond repair. A year later, and the government is now feeling the repercussions of Musk's awful leadership. In her analysis of media reports and public sources, Elaine Kamerick, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution think tank, found that about 25,000 people who were fired were rehired because they were deemed to be essential. And did all those cuts that DOGE did really help to serve the American taxpayer? Then we got Mr. Zuck. The appeal of his willingness to defy authority in college transformed into the exact opposite as more news surfaced about him enabling the widespread collection of personal data, facilitating addictive algorithms, amplifying misinformation, and failing to adequately protect children from sexual exploitation. It also felt like every new interview that surfaced of him had him displaying really socially awkward behavior, like way weirder than his interviews when he was in college first building Facebook.
I think that some decisions that we made early on to localize the website and keep it separate for each college on the network kept it really useful.
Nice. What else is coming? I love Beat Saber. Lay it on us. I'm excited. All right, thanks, Deb. This is going to be amazing. I think it's time for my workout.
I mean, we should have felt this from the start, really. Facebook was built off a stolen idea. And the biggest bomb drop that revealed to the public that basically everyone in a position of power is connected to one another and part of something more devious than we ever could have imagined is the Epstein Files. Now, this topic deserves its own video in itself, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically, almost all people in positions of power are in the files, and they're all trying to distract you from this fact by either putting the blame on someone else, diverting your attention, or purposefully confusing you. This is where manufacturing consent, a concept developed by Noam Chomsky and Edward S. Herman, becomes a useful lens. Because it helps explain how narratives can be shaped in ways that diffuse responsibility and preserve the reputations of people in power. The first filter of the model is ownership. When early reporting on Epstein was being developed, there were documented instances of stories being delayed or softened at major outlets. The most well-known example is the ABC report that never aired, despite journalists having substantial material. When media organizations are large institutions with reputations and relationships to protect, stories that implicate powerful networks don't always move forward as aggressively as they could. The next filter is advertising. Coverage of Epstein consistently spiked when new names or documents dropped, but rarely sustained deep investigative focus on the broader system. Why? Because long, uncomfortable investigations into elite networks don't perform as well as short bursts of scandal. The incentive is to cycle outrage, not sit in it long enough to understand it. Sourcing, the next filter, is even more direct. Most of what the public knows about the Epstein Files comes from court documents, depositions, and selectively released records. Entire portions remain sealed or heavily redacted, so the narrative is intentionally structurally incomplete. You're reacting to fragments that were filtered before they even reached you. Then comes the FLAC filter. Anyone who tries to connect those fragments into a larger picture risks being labeled as conspiratorial, even when they're working from real documents. This creates an effect where journalists and commentators stay within safe, provable claims, even if those claims don't capture the full scope of what might be happening. And finally, there's the filter of ideology. There's a strong tendency to frame Epstein as an isolated monster rather than a node within a larger network of power. That framing is comforting. It allows people to believe that the system works and that justice was served on this guy. But it also discourages deeper questions about how Epstein was able to operate so openly for so long with so many high-profile connections. Put all of that together and you get the controlled ambiguity that most of us have felt since the files dropped. You know enough to feel disturbed, but not enough to fully understand the structure behind it. However, I would argue that this intentional propagandizing has backfired. Since we've all become aware of this process and how awful it really is, that manufactured cynicism is actually what's breaking the illusion. The same systems that once made these people feel aspirational, like the empathetic interviews, the weird founder stories, and the sleeping on the floor mythology, are the ones that start to shatter once you realize how filtered everything actually is. These systems have been exposed enough that the average person feels more skeptical and less trustworthy than ever, and now any attempt to rehabilitate their image from these tech oligarchs feels like a fake, pathetic attempt to regain public esteem. meme. You guys remember Zuckerberg's recent rebrand? The longer curly hair showing him doing MMA, wearing better clothing and a chain, being more transparent about his products failing? Like, did any of y'all fall for that shit? This dude has been exposed way too many times for me to suddenly think, oh wait, he's cool again, and he's socially magnetic because he's wearing baggy clothing and he's doing MMA and he's so cool. Another example of this is the AI company Anthropic and what it's been doing recently with its marketing campaigns. They're really trying to be the most anti-AI AI company. In their ads, they show people using AI in very human situations and shun other companies for implementing ads on their platforms. Their slogan is keep thinking, but nothing about their chatbot really separates them from ChatGPT at all. So why should they be treated any differently? At the end of the day, most of us will never be able to relate to these tech oligarchs or become one ourselves for one simple reason. The only things they care about are themselves and their company. In a recent interview, venture capitalist Mark Andreessen described this perfectly.
You don't have any levels of introspection.
Yes, zero, as little as possible.
Why?
Move forward, go. Yeah, I don't know. I found people who dwell in the past get stuck in the past. It's a real problem, and it's a problem at work and it's a problem at home.
So I've read obviously 400, and I think now 10 biographies of history-based entrepreneurs, and that was one of the most surprising things. Like, what's the most surprising thing that you've learned from this? So like, oh, they have little or zero introspection.
Yeah.
Like Sam Walton didn't wake up thinking about his internal self. He just woke up. He's like, I like building Walmart. I'm going to keep building Walmart. I'm going to make more Walmarts, and just kept doing it over and over again.
And you probably know, if you go back, before 100 years ago, it never would have occurred to anybody to be introspective. Like, it's the whole idea of, I mean, just all of the modern conceptions around introspection and therapy and all the things that kind of result from that are, kind of manufactured in the 1910s, 1920s.
Say more about that.
Great men of history didn't sit around doing this stuff at any prior point, right? It's all a new construct. So first Western civilization had to kind of invent the concept of the individual, right? Which was like a new concept, several hundred years ago. And then, for a long time it was, all right, the individual runs, right? And like does all these things and builds things and, builds empires and builds companies and builds technology, does all these things. And then, kind of this kind of guilt-based whammy, kind of showed up from Europe.
So according to this guy, and presumably all other billionaires or people at the top 1%, being introspective is a ploy to make you feel guilt. Buddy, you're supposed to feel guilty when you do something wrong. That's what makes you human? Well, we at home at least appreciate you saying the quiet part out loud. Essentially, none of you billionaires are thinking about the consequences of your actions or why you even build what you build. You just move forward. You just do things without thinking. Can you, as a viewer, relate to any of that? Do you want to become someone like that? I'm sure you don't. And before you tell me that, oh, it's because of money. Money is the root problem of all these guys becoming evil. I think they just proved to you that it isn't. This is a belief I've held for a long time now, but I don't think money corrupts people. I don't think that good people turn evil when they start receiving more of it. I think money reveals to you who you've always been. It is a vehicle that allows you to become more of what you are. And if that makes you ask why the people who attract the most money so often seem socially inept or morally compromised, maybe the better question is to ask why the system we live in tends to reward those traits, instead of the people who would actually do something good with that kind of power. There is some good news to all of this, however, and it's that these people are not impervious. Just this month in 2026, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta Platforms lost a major court case. It involved a plaintiff who went by the initials KGM, who claimed that Facebook and YouTube contributed to harm during their kids' formative years and damaged their mental health. And they were awarded $3 million in compensatory damages. As Timothy Edgar, a lecturer at Harvard, puts it, it was a major watershed event that represent a big shift in how Americans are viewing big tech. It's kind of the culmination of many years of growing skepticism. An average person was able to get millions of dollars from the damage that some of these billion-dollar companies have caused. Their stocks are dropping. They are not invincible, and you can have a similar sort of influence. Even if you're not the one filing the lawsuit, supporting class actions or bringing attention to them increases the pressure and the likelihood that more information gets exposed. You can also influence policy. The addictive incentives that drive these platforms aren't made of metal. They are written into laws, regulations, and business models, which means they can be rewritten. The General Data Protection Regulation in Europe is a perfect example. It didn't destroy tech companies, but it forced them to change how they handle user data and introduced massive fines for violations. Similar efforts in the US, even at the state level, are starting to gain traction. Paying attention to these policies and supporting the politicians that are initiating these changes is one of the best ways to support structural change. Then there's advertiser pressure, which is massively underrated. These platforms run on ad revenue, and when advertisers pull out, companies respond quickly. We've seen this with multiple advertiser boycotts over the years, where brands temporarily stop spending after controversies around misinformation or harmful content. So even small efforts to contact brands and question where they're being placed is going to create a positive change. And finally, this is something I talk about a lot, there's how you actually use these platforms. And I'm not talking about just destroy your phone and live in the woods sort of thing. I mean, just be more intentional. Reducing engagement with outrage-driven content, avoiding doom scrolling, being selective about what you interact with. These things sound small, but they directly affect the algorithms these companies rely on. Their entire business model is built on attention, so when this attention becomes more deliberate and harder to capture, it starts to chip away at that system. Do not fall for the propaganda. These guys do not care about you. They don't care about helping you. They want your attention. They want to capture it forever. They want you to stay average or below average because that's when they make the most money off of your misery. And a lot of them are kid diddlers or they're associated with kid diddlers. Let me know your thoughts as always in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe you'll like why Gen Z can't start a revolution and why we probably should get to the point where we can start one, something similar to it. Yeah, check out that video if you want to, or just go outside, enjoy the day. Just log off for a little while because this makes the world seem way crazier than it actually is. But it also is pretty crazy. Okay, I'm going to go. Bye.